Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really immersing ourselves in a legal drama that, well, it captivated and deeply divided the whole world, the trial of Oscar Pistorius.
Yeah, I mean, for so many people, just hearing the name Pistorius immediately brings up that image of the Blade Runner.
Absolutely. The double amputee runner who just transcended the Paralympics, competed right alongside able-bodied athletes at the 2012 London Olympics. He was such a symbol.
A global symbol of triumph, of human ability. And then, almost overnight, that symbol just crashed spectacularly. Thursday, February 14th, 2013, Valentine's Day.
That morning, his partner, Reeva Steenkamp, was shot and killed at his home in Pretoria.
And the shift from this global inspiration to suddenly being a murder suspect, it was immediate, shocking.
So yeah, our mission here in this deep dive, it's really about getting past those headlines.
Exactly. There's just so much noise around this case.
We've got, well, a mountain of source material, court transcripts, all the expert testimony, the appeal rulings.
A huge amount.
And we want to cut through that, really meticulously analyze the facts that were actually presented, the really contested narratives too, and the legal journey itself, how the state versus Oscar Pistorius evolved.
Yeah, the goal isn't to give our opinions. It's about clarity. Clarity on the legal process, what actually happened in court, and maybe uncovering some of those aha moments about why it was all just so complex, so polarizing.
Definitely. And we should start with the facts that aren't really disputed, right?
Good idea. So Pistorius himself admitted firing 4 shots through a locked toilet door in his bathroom.
And those shots hit Reeva Steenkamp 3 times, fatally.
Yes. And his defense from the very beginning was consistent. He thought she was an intruder, a dangerous intruder. He claimed it was a tragic mistake.
And the sheer visibility of this case, it was kind of revolutionary, wasn't it? For South Africa especially.
Oh, absolutely. The trial started March 2014, and the whole thing was broadcast live on audio. And key parts were televised. It basically put the entire world inside that courtroom.
Okay, so the stage is set. But the volatility, the chaos, it started almost immediately after the shooting, even before the main trial.
Yeah, way before. Let's jump right into that, the initial legal mess and, frankly, the police missteps.
So Pistorius is arrested, and he's formally charged with murder pretty quickly, like February 15th, 2013.
Right. And the first big huddle was the charge itself. It wasn't just murder. It was a Schedule 6 offense.
And Schedule 6 in South Africa, that covers really serious, often premeditated crimes, right?
Exactly, including premeditated murder. And what that meant legally was the burden shifted immediately to the defense. They had to prove exceptional circumstances just to get him bail.
So the default assumption was he stays in jail until the trial.
Pretty much, unless his lawyers could convince the magistrate that he wasn't a flight risk, wasn't a danger. It's a very high bar.
Wow. Okay, so that bail hearing, which lasted 4 days, it became this intense sort of preview of the whole trial, didn't it?
It really did. You had the prosecutor, Jerry Nell, facing off against the defense advocate, Barry Rue, and the state's core argument for denying bail and hinting at premeditation even then was fascinating.
What was Nell's angle at that point?
Nell argued Pistorius intentionally killed Steenkamp. And the state's theory, early on, really hinged on the time factor.
But the time it took.
The time it would take Pistorius, they argued, to realize something was happening, maybe an argument, get out of bed, strap on his prosthetic legs. This was key for them initially. Walk to the bathroom, and then fire 4 shots.
Ah, so Nell was saying that sequence took long enough for him to think about it, to form intent.
That was the implication. That window, Nell suggested, was enough to establish premeditation, or at least enough doubt to deny bail.
But the defense, led by Rue, came right back with the story that would become their central case.
Immediately. Rue laid out the defense narrative. Pistorius thought Reeva was still in bed, safe. The person making noise in the toilet. An intruder.
And crucially, what about the legs?
Rue insisted Pistorius did not put on his prosthetics until after the shooting. He confronted the noise, fired the shots, all while on his stumps.
Which completely undermines that initial timeline the prosecution was building for premeditation, doesn't it?
Exactly. It cuts the legs out from under that specific argument. Pun intended, I suppose.
And Rue also had a pretty strong counter to the idea that Pistorius was a flight risk, didn't he? The prosecution mentioned offshore accounts, Italy.
Yeah, the state tried that angle. But Rue just hammered home a very practical point. Oscar Pistorius was arguably one of the most recognizable people on the entire planet.
His fame, his unique appearance.
Right. His global fame combined with being a double amputee who relies on very specific prosthetics.
Yeah.
Rue argued it was, and I quote, virtually impossible for him to disappear or flee the country without being spotted almost instantly.
That's a very compelling point, actually.
It was, and it seemed to sway the magistrate, Desmond Nair. After those 4 intense days, bail was granted, set at R1 million, which is about 113,000 US dollars back then.
So the defense won that round. But the prosecution, even while they kept the murder charge alive, they ran into immediate serious trouble.
Oh, massive trouble. Their whole case foundation started to wobble because of the lead investigator, Detective Hilton Botha. This part of the story is just, it shows the procedural chaos right at the start.
Yeah, talk about missteps. Botha's testimony during the bail hearing was, well, a disaster for the prosecution.
A complete disaster. He started giving conflicting evidence, stuff that was easily picked apart by Rue, like the crucial acoustic evidence the screams people heard.
What happened there?
Botha initially said a key witness who heard screaming lived 600 meters away. Then under pressure, he changed it to 300 meters.
Okay.
But later, it was actually measured, the distance was only 177 meters.
Yeah, that's a huge difference. 600 versus 177. That really damages the credibility of that witness's account, or at least both his handling of it.
Completely. It undermined the reliability of that whole auditory timeline the state was trying to piece together. And it got worse.
The crime scene itself?
Yeah, the procedural errors were, frankly, appalling. Botha had to admit, under cross-examination, that investigators had walked through the scene without proper protective boots on.
Contaminating potential evidence.
Potentially destroying microscopic evidence, yes. And even worse, the police investigators completely missed a bullet. One of the bullets had hit the toilet bowl and fragmented.
Missed it.
They missed it entirely.
Yeah.
It was found later by the defense's forensic team.
Oh, that's bad. That's really bad for the police credibility.
It's a massive blow. Ethically, factually. It suggests incompetence, or at least carelessness, right at the heart of the investigation.
And wasn't there also something about drugs? Both made a claim.
Yes. He claimed on the stand that they found testosterone and needles in Pistorius' bedroom, trying to paint a picture of maybe roid rage or recklessness. But the defense immediately shot it down. They proved the substance was just a legal herbal remedy, something called testocompassusium coenzyme. But they had to completely retract his statement about testosterone.
So, mistake after mistake. Retraction after retraction. It sounds like his position became untenable.
Totally untenable. The situation blew up when it was revealed that Botha himself was facing serious criminal charges, multiple counts of attempted murder.
Attempted murder
From an incident back in 2011. He and 2 other officers allegedly got drunk and fired shots at a minibus taxi carrying 7 passengers.
And these charges were active when he was leading the Pistorius investigation.
The charges had been dropped, but then they were reinstated just 10 days before Reeva Steenkamp was shot. The timing was just catastrophic for the prosecution's image.
So he had to be replaced.
Immediately. He was taken off the case, replaced by Lieutenant General Vinesh Kumar Munu, who was the SAPS's top detective, but the damage was already done.
So before the main trial even properly starts, the state's initial investigation is in tatters. Their lead detective utterly discredited.
Yeah, it created this huge credibility vacuum. Prosecutor Nell basically had to start from behind, fighting an uphill battle just to get the court to trust the basic police work.
Okay, so with that background of investigative chaos setting the stage, let's move into the absolute core of the trial. The 2 completely opposing stories of what happened that night.
Right, so the trial really boiled down to these 2 starkly different narratives. The defense's version, which Pistorius delivered through his affidavit and then his very emotional testimony. It all hinged on 2 main ideas.
Which were?
His unique physical vulnerability when he's off his prosthetics and his deep-seated, pervasive fear of crime, of intruders. A fear, the defense argued, that's sadly quite common in South Africa.
Okay, let's walk through the defense's timeline as they presented it. How did that evening supposedly unfold?
According to Pistorius, it was a quiet evening at home. Reeva was doing some yoga exercises. He was watching TV. His prosthetic legs were off. Eventually, they went to sleep.
Pretty normal sounding.
Then in the early hours of Valentine's Day morning, he wakes up. It's hot, humid. He goes onto the balcony to bring in a fan, closes the doors, maybe the curtains.
And he's on his stumps at this point.
Yes, that's the crucial detail for the defense. He's on his stumps. And it's then, he says, that he hears a noise coming from the bathroom, sounding like the window opening, like someone breaking in.
And his reaction?
Immediate fear. He testified his first thought was intruders, dangerous intruders, who could harm both him and Reeva.
And this is where that vulnerability claim really comes into play, isn't it?
Exactly. He grabs his 9mm pistol, which he kept under the bed. He said he whispered to Reeva, thinking she was still beside him in bed, to call the police,
Believing she was safe there.
believing she was safe. He then moves towards the bathroom, still in his scumps. And he described feeling extremely vulnerable in that state, sort of trapped between where he thought the intruders were and the bedroom door.
So panic and vulnerability. And then
He reaches the closed toilet door. Believing the intruders are hiding inside that small cubicle, he fires 4 shots through the door.
believing he's defending himself and Reeva.
That was his testimony. The horrifying realization, he said, only came afterwards. He retreats from the door, shouting for Reeva. He gets back towards the bed, maybe touches it, and realizes she's not there.
Oh, God. The dawning horror.
He said it hit him, then the person behind the door.
No.
It must have been her.
And his actions after that realization, what did the defense say he did?
They describe pure panic, rushing back to the bathroom door, trying to kick it open but failing because it was locked, rushing back out to the balcony, screaming for help.
Then getting the bat.
Finally, yes. He said he went back, put on his prosthetic legs. This detail becomes important. Later grabbed a cricket bat and used it to smash open the damaged toilet door panel.
And inside?
He found Reeva, slumped over the toilet, still alive at that moment, he said, but catastrophically injured, dying.
And there was some neighbor testimony that seemed to support this immediate aftermath, right? The panic.
Yes. People like Dr. Johann Stipp, a radiologist who lived nearby and was one of the first on the scene. Stipp testified he found Pistorius weeping, praying over Reeva's body, saying repeatedly, "I shot her. I thought she was a burglar. I shot her."
Okay, so that's the defense narrative. Vulnerability, fear, mistaken identity, tragic accident.
But prosecutor Jerry Nell, he absolutely tore into that narrative. His cross-examination was relentless. He argued the whole thing was a fabrication.
And Nell's position was that it wasn't an accident at all.
Not at all. Nell maintained the shooting happened after a furious argument between Pistorius and Steenkamp, that the killing was intentional.
He famously confronted Pistorius directly in court, didn't he?
He did. That incredibly tense moment where Nell looked at him and said something like, "You fired 4 shots through the door whilst knowing that she was standing behind the door." He argued Pistorius knew someone was there and intended to kill them.
Even if he didn't know for sure it was Reeva? Or did Nell argue he knew it was Reeva?
Nell argued he knew it was Reeva. But legally, under dolus eventualis, even if Pistorius wasn't 100% sure, Nell argued he knew shooting into that small space would likely kill whoever was there, and he proceeded anyway. We'll get more into that legal point later.
Right. And the prosecution also highlighted the type of ammunition he used, didn't they? To support the idea of intent to kill.
Yes, that was significant. The pathologist, Dr. Gert Seaman, testified about the bullets. They were black talon hollow point rounds.
Which are?
Well, they're not your standard bullets. As the sources describe them, they are specifically designed to cause maximum damage. They expand on impact, creating much larger wound channels.
So using that type of ammunition, the prosecution suggested, showed a mindset geared towards lethal force, not just warning shots or stopping someone.
That was certainly the implication Nell wanted the court to draw. Why use bullets designed for maximum devastation if you're just panicked and firing blindly?
Nell also had to address why, if Pistorius was lying, he didn't try to stage a break-in, make the intruder's story more believable.
He did address that in his closing arguments. Nell's theory was quite chilling. He suggested the argument escalated, Reeva locked herself in the toilet for safety perhaps, and it was only then, Nell argued, that Pistorius decided to kill her. The locked door provided the moment, the opportunity.
So a spontaneous but still intentional act fueled by rage, according to Nell.
That was the prosecution's case. Nell basically summed it up by saying Pistorius had built a snowball of lies to cover up a deliberate killing, maybe planned in seconds, but deliberate nonetheless.
So the court was left with this stark choice. Tragic mistake driven by fear and vulnerability, or a deliberate killing hidden behind a convenient story.
Exactly. And to decide between those two, the court had to sift through a huge amount of conflicting evidence, forensic, scientific, emotional.
Right, let's get into that contested evidence. It feels like almost every piece of physical or psychological evidence was fought over. Where should we start? Maybe the prosthetics again.
Yeah, the prosthetics issue is a great example of how complex and shifting the evidence was. As we mentioned initially at the bail hearing, the prosecution used the idea he put his legs on first to argue premeditation, the time factor.
But that argument didn't really hold up at the main trial, did it?
No, the state actually had to make a major concession. Their own ballistics expert, Captain Christian Mangina, testified based on the bullet trajectory analysis.
What did he find?
He concluded that the shooter was most likely not wearing prosthetic legs when the shots were fired. The angle of the shots through the door matched someone firing from a lower height, consistent with being on stumps.
So Mangina's testimony actually supported the defense's core claim on that point.
It did. It significantly weakened the state's original premeditation argument based on the putting legs on timeline.
Okay, but then the prosthetics debate kind of flipped, didn't it? It became an issue for the defense regarding what happened after the shooting.
Exactly. It got really muddled when it came to how the toilet door was broken down with the cricket bat.
Rue, the defense lawyer, challenged the state's forensic analyst, Colonel Johannes Vermeulen, on this, right?
Yes. Rue basically set up a paradox for the state, but maybe also for his own client, he argued. If Pistorius was on his stumps when he fired the shots, as the ballistics suggested,
then presumably he was still on his stumps when he grabbed the cricket bat moments later.
That was Rue's point. And he demonstrated, or argued very strongly, how incredibly difficult, maybe even impossible it would be for Pistorius to balance effectively on his stumps while swinging a heavy cricket bat with enough force to smash through that thick wooden door.
So the implication Rue was trying to create was...
It seemed Rue was implying that Vermeulen's analysis of the bat marks must be wrong, OR. And this is where it gets tricky. Maybe Pistorius did put his legs on before using the bat.
Which contradicts the defense narrative of pure panic and disability right up until he found Reeva.
Precisely. It shows how fractured the forensic picture was. Depending on whether you looked at the shooting or the breaking down of the door, the prosthetics evidence could be interpreted in ways that caused problems for both sides. It was confusing.
Okay, let's shift from the physical dynamics to the relationship itself. The court spent a lot of time trying to figure out if there was tension, if an argument could have happened.
Yes, understanding the relationship dynamic was crucial to assessing the motive question. We heard from Pistorius's agent, Pete Van Zyl.
What was his take?
Van Zyl described their relationship, which was only about 3 months old, as generally loving and caring. He did describe Pistorius as hypervigilant, very aware of security, but said he rarely saw him lose his temper.
But then came the text messages. Digital evidence.
Right. The police extracted about 1,700 messages exchanged between Pistorius and Steenkamp. And analysis showed, yes, about 90% of them were loving, affectionate, normal couple stuff.
But the other 10%?
Included some arguments. And one message from Reeva, sent less than 3 weeks before she died, became incredibly significant. It was read out in court.
What did it say?
She wrote to him, "I'm scared of you sometimes, of how you snap at me." She also described his behavior during a recent incident as nasty.
Wow, I'm scared of you sometimes. That's incredibly damning, isn't it? Coming from the woman who was later killed.
It landed very heavily in court. It directly contradicted the defense portrayal of a perfectly harmonious relationship.
How did the defense counter that specific message?
Rue tried to minimize its impact. He pointed out that out of 1,700 messages, they only found evidence of about 4 arguments in total. And he claimed these were resolved quickly, like normal couples tiffs.
And they also brought up the Valentine's card.
Yes, as an emotional counterpoint. The card Reeva had prepared for him for Valentine's Day, the day she died. Inside, she'd written, "I think today is a good day to tell you that I love you."
So conflicting signals, love and declarations of fear. Very complex.
Very. Okay, another major contested area, the sounds neighbors heard, specifically the screams.
This was central to the prosecution's argument that there was a fight beforehand, right?
Absolutely. Several neighbors testified for the prosecution. Michelle Berger, who lived 177 meters away, was a key witness. She was adamant she heard a woman's terrifying screams before the shots were fired.
Suggesting Reeva was screaming during an argument or in fear before the shooting started.
That was the prosecution's interpretation. But the defense had strong counterarguments.
What were they?
Firstly, they argued the screams neighbors heard weren't Reeva's at all. They claimed they were Pistorius himself.
Pistorius screaming?
Yes. The defense brought evidence, suggesting that when Pistorius was highly distressed, anxious, or panicking, his voice became extremely high-pitched, almost like a woman's scream.
Okay, that's one angle. What else?
They also used medical evidence. They argued Reeva couldn't possibly have screamed after being shot, especially the shot to her head, because the brain damage would have been immediate and catastrophic. So any screams must have been before or not her.
And they brought in science to challenge whether the screams could even be heard clearly.
Yes, they called in acoustic engineer Ivan Lynn. He testified that based on scientific sound propagation tests conducted at the scene, it was actually very unlikely that screams especially intelligible words, could be clearly heard or identified as male or female from 177 meters away, given background noise and acoustics.
So the court had neighbor testimony, people swearing they heard a woman scream, versus scientific probability suggesting it was unlikely. Tough call.
Extremely tough. It pits subjective human perception against objective scientific analysis.
And overlaying all of this evidence was Pistorius's own state, his psychological profile, his disability. The defense used this heavily.
They did. His behavior in court was very visible. The frequent crying, the emotional outburst, even vomiting during graphic testimony. It painted a picture of extreme emotional distress.
And the experts backed this up.
The defense called psychiatrist Dr. Merrill Vorster. Her testimony was crucial. She diagnosed Pistorius with a generalized anxiety disorder.
Stemming from?
She traced it back to childhood trauma. His parents' difficult separation, the early amputation, and significantly, the fact that his mother was very anxious about crime and apparently slept with a firearm under her pillow.
Wow. So Vorster argued this anxiety disorder made him hypersensitive to perceived threats.
Yes, and crucially, she testified that because of his physical disability, his inability to easily flee danger, he was psychologically predisposed to a fight rather than a flight response when he felt threatened.
His body couldn't flee, so his mind chose to fight.
That was the essence of her argument. His reaction, while tragic, stemmed from this deep-seated anxiety and vulnerability.
And the physical experts reinforced the inability to flee part.
Yes. Dr. Gerald Versfeld, the surgeon who actually performed Pistorius' amputations years ago, testified. He confirmed that when Pistorius is on his stumps, his balance is poor, his mobility is severely limited, he'd be severely impaired, and couldn't run away easily.
Professor Wayne Derman also testified, didn't he? He described a paradox.
Yes, Professor Derman, who worked closely with Pistorius as a sports physician, talked about this paradox of an individual who is supremely able, the elite athlete, and you've got an individual who is significantly disabled. He argued this duality led to a state of hypervigilance, a constant heightened awareness of potential threats, because he couldn't rely on escape.
So the defense paints a picture of someone psychologically primed for fear and physically unable to escape, leading to a fight response.
Exactly. But then the prosecution brought up something that complicated that narrative of the terrified victim. Pistorius' known fascination with guns.
Right, the love of guns testimony?
It came from Sean Renz, a firearms dealer and trainer who knew Pistorius. Renz testified Pistorius had a great love and enthusiasm for firearms.
He bought guns from Renz.
Yes, including a very powerful Smith & Wesson 500 revolver, a massive handgun. Renz said Pistorius had ordered several other guns, too. It showed a clear interest in acquiring serious firepower.
And Renz told a story about Pistorius reacting to a noise.
Yes, a really telling anecdote. Months before the shooting, Pistorius was at home, heard a noise he couldn't identify, turned out to be a laundry machine. His reaction. He grabbed his gun, Renz said, and went into combat mode, clearing the house room by room.
Combat mode over washing machine. That suggests a very high level of reactivity with a firearm.
It suggests a pattern, doesn't it? A tendency to respond to uncertainty with lethal force drawn. Renz also testified Pistorius knew South African gun laws well, including rules about self-defense.
And weren't there other gun charges against him in this same trial, separate incidents?
Yes, that's crucial. He was also on trial for 2 other firearms offenses. One for recklessly firing a gun out of a car's sunroof, and another for firing someone else's Glock handgun by accident in a busy restaurant just weeks before he shot Reeva.
So the prosecution could argue that shooting Reeva wasn't an isolated lapse in judgment, but part of a pattern of reckless and dangerous behavior with guns.
Precisely. That history of recklessness became very important, especially when the court considered negligence. It painted a picture not just of fear, but of someone perhaps dangerously comfortable with firearms.
Okay, so after all that conflicting testimony, the science, the emotion, the trial finally reached a verdict. Judge Thokozile Masipa delivered her judgment in September 2014. What was the initial outcome?
Well, Judge Masipa started by saying Pistorius was a very poor witness. She found him evasive, often contradictory, not a good start for him.
Hey.
But she then proceeded to clear him of the most serious charges, which surprised many people. She ruled out premeditated murder, and crucially, she also ruled out the standard murder charge, the one involving dolus eventualis.
Right, dolus eventualis. We touched on this. Why did Judge Masipa rule it out? What was her reasoning?
Her reasoning focused almost entirely on Pistorius' subjective belief at the moment he fired the shots.
His belief that it was an intruder.
Exactly. Dolus eventualis, again, is about foresight. Did the person foresee the possibility that their actions could cause death? And did they proceed anyway, reconciling themselves to that possibility? Masapu concluded that Pistorius did not subjectively foresee killing Reeva.
Because he thought she was in the bedroom.
Yes. In Masapu's view, his genuine, albeit mistaken, belief about who was behind the door meant he didn't have the required legal foresight in relation to the actual victim. She said he didn't foresee this as a possibility, that he would kill the person behind the door, let alone the deceased Reeva, as he thought she was in the bedroom.
So she's saying his mistake about the identity protected him from the murder conviction.
That was her interpretation of dolus eventualis at the time.
But she didn't find him innocent. He was convicted of something else.
Correct. She found him guilty of culpable homicide.
Which is like manslaughter in other systems. Negligent killing.
Exactly. It's an unlawful killing committed negligently, without intent. Masapu's reasoning here shifted to the reasonable person standard.
What would a reasonable person have done?
She argued that a reasonable person, even one facing a perceived threat, would have foreseen that firing 4 shots with a powerful handgun into a tiny, closed toilet cubicle was likely to kill whoever was inside. They wouldn't have just opened fire like that.
So she found his actions fell below that standard.
Yes. She stated Pistorius acted too hastily and used excessive force. His actions were therefore negligent, unlawful, and resulted in death, hence culpable homicide. She didn't think he intended to kill Reeva or foresaw killing her, but his actions were unacceptably reckless and careless.
And the sentence for that.
She sentenced him to a maximum of 5 years in prison for the culpable homicide, plus a suspended sentence for the restaurant gun incident charge he was also found guilty of.
5 years. That seemed very lenient to many people, didn't it, for taking a life?
It was extremely controversial. Hugely controversial, and the controversy continued when it came to his parole.
What happened there?
Under South African law at the time, he became eligible for parole after serving just 1/6 of his sentence, which was 10 months. And the parole board initially approved his release for October 2015.
After less than a year in prison.
Yes. And this caused a massive public outcry. There was a feeling that justice hadn't been served, that the sentence was too light.
Did the government get involved?
It did. The Minister of Justice, Michael Masuka, intervened quite unusually. He questioned the legality of the parole board's decision, arguing it was made prematurely before Pistorius had served the required minimum time.
So his release was delayed?
It was delayed, and the whole situation became highly politicized. There were suggestions of political interference trying to respond to public anger. The ruling party's official Twitter account even incorrectly called him a convicted murderer at that stage, which he wasn't yet. It was messy.
All this controversy kind of set the stage for the prosecution to appeal the verdict itself, didn't it?
Absolutely. The state, led by Gary Nell, appealed Judge Masapu's culpable homicide verdict to the Supreme Court of Appeal, SCA. And this appeal led to the single most important legal turning point in the entire case.
This is where the murder conviction came in.
Yes. In December 2015, the SCA overturned Masapu's verdict. They set aside the culpable homicide conviction and found Pistorius guilty of murder.
Okay, so let's really unpack this because it's the crucial legal distinction. How did the Supreme Court see dolus eventualis so differently from Judge Masapu?
The SCA fundamentally disagreed with Masapu's focus on Pistorius' subjective belief about the identity of the person behind the door.
They said that didn't matter.
They said it wasn't the deciding factor for dolus eventualis. The SCA, in a judgment read by Justice Eric Leach, focused squarely on the action itself and the inherent danger it posed.
The act of firing the gun.
Exactly. Justice Leach basically said, forget whether he thought it was Reeva or an intruder for a moment. Look at the act. Pistorius, a man trained in firearms, knowingly fired 4 shots from a high-caliber weapon using ammunition designed to kill.
Black Talon bullets.
Into a tiny enclosed space, a toilet cubicle, where there was no escape for anyone inside. The court argued that Pistorius must have foreseen that doing so would very likely kill whoever was behind that door.
Regardless of their identity.
Regardless of their identity. By proceeding with that inherently lethal action despite foreseeing the potential deadly consequence, he acted with dolus eventualis. He took a conscious risk with a human life.
So the legal test shifted from did he foresee killing Reeva to did he foresee that his actions could kill a person?
Precisely. The SCA found that Mitsapa had incorrectly applied the principle of dolus eventualis. The identity of the victim was irrelevant to whether he foresaw the lethal consequences of firing through the door. His mistake about identity might be relevant to motive, perhaps, but not to the foresight required for murder under dolus eventualis.
That is a really critical distinction. It highlights the objective danger over the subjective mistake.
It does, and it led the SCA panel to famously describe the whole case as a human tragedy of Shakespearean proportions.
So now, convicted of murder, Pistorius had to be resentenced.
Yes, the case went back to Judge Messapa for resentencing in July 2016.
And what she decided this time for murder?
She sentenced him to 6 years in prison for murder.
6 years. But isn't the minimum sentence for murder in South Africa much higher, like 15 years?
It is. The prescribed minimum is 15 years. Messapa deviated significantly downwards from that minimum. She cited mitigating factors like his remorse, his disability, the time already served, and her belief that he was genuinely devastated.
6 years for murder. That must have caused another outcry.
Huge outcry again.
Yeah.
The prosecution immediately appealed the sentence, arguing it was shockingly lenient and inappropriate for the crime of murder.
And did that appeal succeed?
It did. In November 2017, the Supreme Court of Appeal agreed with the prosecution. They found the 6-year sentence was indeed too lenient and didn't adequately reflect the severity of the crime.
So what was the final sentence?
The SCA increased the sentence to the standard 15 years for murder. They then subtracted the time Pistorius had already served. So effectively, he was sentenced to an additional 13 years and 5 months from that point.
15 years total. That became the final sentence.
That was the final judicial outcome. And after serving the required portion of that sentence, considering parole eligibility rules, Pistorius was eventually released on parole on January 5th, 2024.
After serving about 9 years in total across the different phases.
Roughly, yes.
Huh.
Long and incredibly complex legal road.
Absolutely complex. And beyond the courtroom, the legal details, this trial just exploded into a global media phenomenon, didn't it?
Oh, completely. That decision back in 2014 to allow live audio broadcasting in parts televised.
Right.
It was unprecedented for a South African trial on that scale. And it immediately drew comparisons, especially in the U.S. and U.K. media, to the O.J. Simpson trial from the 90s.
Why that comparison? The celebrity aspect.
Partly the celebrity, yes, but also how it seemed to tap into deeper societal issues. One source described it as reflecting South Africa's complicated obsession with race, crime, and celebrity. It hit all those notes.
And the visual impact was huge. I remember the Time magazine cover.
By that Time cover from March 2013, very early on, the headline was stark: Pistorius and South Africa's Culture of Violence. And the imagery portrayed his evolution from man to Superman to gunman. It captured that shattering of the icon perfectly.
Did the intense media coverage change journalism in South Africa itself?
The sources suggest it really did. It was a turning point, especially for traditional print media. Local newspapers apparently struggled to keep up with the speed and constant updates coming from live TV, radio, and especially social media. It highlighted the shift to digital-first news consumption for major unfolding stories.
And sometimes that media frenzy spilled over into pretty distasteful territory.
Definitely. The Paddy Power incident is a prime example. They're an Irish gambling company.
What did they do?
They ran ads offering money back if he walks, betting on the trial outcome. It was incredibly crass, trivializing a murder trial.
Was there backlash?
Massive backlash.
Yeah.
It received a record number of complaints to the UK's Advertising Standards Authority, over 5,500. The ASA ruled against Paddy Power, saying the ads brought the entire advertising industry into disrepute by linking gambling to a murder trial involving violence against women. Just awful.
Yeah, truly awful. But social media wasn't just for betting scandals. It was also the main source of information for many people following the trial.
Absolutely. The trial basically made international names out of several South African journalists who were live tweeting from the courtroom. They became the primary, the go-to source for minute-by-minute updates and analysis for a global audience.
And didn't the defense team try to use social media, too, to manage the narrative?
They did, which was quite innovative or perhaps defensive at the time. They launched their own official Twitter account, I think it was called, @OscarHardTruth or something similar.
Truth.
Yeah, the aim was to provide what they called factual updates, their version of the facts to counter negative press and directly manage the public perception of the case online. A very modern PR tactic in a high-profile trial.
Beyond the updates and the PR, though, the case clearly struck a deeper cultural nerve in South Africa.
It really did. Crime novelist Margie Orford wrote powerfully about how the trial taps into a painful narrative in which race, sex, power, and violence converge in South Africa.
And a key part of that narrative was the fear element used in the defense, wasn't it?
Yes, particularly the idea of the imaginary black stranger at the heart of the defense, as one commentator put it.
Explain that a bit more. How did race and fear play into it?
Well, Pistorius' defense relied heavily on this narrative of him being terrified of a violent intruder breaking in. And in South Africa, because of the history and the high crime rates, that fear of the violent other, the intruder, is often implicitly and sometimes explicitly racialized. It resonates particularly strongly with many affluent, often white South Africans living in fortified homes.
So the defense could tap into a pre-existing societal anxiety.
Exactly. Pistorius, a wealthy, famous, white, disabled man, used this generalized fear of the unknown, often implicitly black intruder, to justify his lethal actions. The sources suggest this cultural context made his mistaken identity claim seem plausible, perhaps even understandable, to Judge Masipa initially, and to parts of the public, despite the lack of any actual evidence of a break-in.
It was a defense rooted in real, deep-seated social anxieties about crime and security.
Very much so. And the legacy of the trial, the tragedy, is still being processed culturally. It's not just faded away.
Like the recent opera.
Yeah, fascinating example. An opera called Trial by Media premiered just recently in April 2024, and it uses the Pistorius trial as its central story.
How does it approach it?
Interestingly, the creators made a point of trying to give Reeva Steenkamp a voice. They cast her character as a sort of posthumous phantasm, drawing her words and presence from her own social media posts, like her Instagram. An artistic attempt to center the victim, who often got overshadowed by the sheer fame and drama surrounding Pistorius.
Covered a huge amount of ground in the investigation, the conflicting narratives, the complex evidence, the legal back and forth, the media storm. Let's try to distill the absolute key takeaways for you, the listener.
I think there are two crucial legal pivots to really understand.
What's the first one?
The first is how the defense successfully capitalized on the absolute shambles of the initial police investigation. Detective Botha's disastrous testimony, the crime scene errors. It fundamentally weakened the state's ability to convincingly argue premeditation right from the start.
It allowed the defense narrative of panic and reaction to gain traction.
Exactly. They exploited those procedural weaknesses brilliantly, allowing Pistorius to avoid the most severe charges in the initial verdict. That collapse of the early investigation was critical.
Okay, and the second key pivot.
The second, and arguably the most important, legally, is that sharp distinction between culpable homicide and murder, hinging entirely on the Supreme Court of Appeals' interpretation of dolus eventualis.
Remind us of that core difference again.
Judge Masipa focused on Pistorius' subjective mistake about who was behind the door she thought he didn't foresee killing Reeva. The appeal court said that's the wrong focus. They look at the objective recklessness of the act itself.
Firing the high-powered weapon into the tiny space.
Yes. They ruled he must have foreseen that doing so could kill a human being regardless of who he thought it was. By going ahead anyway, he demonstrated reckless foresight, dolus eventualis, making him guilty of murder, not just negligence. That legal clarification was profound.
So the failure of the initial investigation and the ultimate legal finding on dolus eventualis based on the act's inherent danger, those are the key legal shifts.
I think so. But beyond the pure legal points, the sources consistently highlight this disturbing paradox about Pistorius himself.
The vulnerability versus the love of guns.
Exactly. You have this man described as having deep-seated anxiety, hypervigilance stemming from trauma, compounded by very real physical limitations when off his legs. Immense vulnerability.
Yet at the same time,
this same vulnerable individual had, according to testimony, a great love and enthusiasm for incredibly powerful firearms. He sought them out, and he had a documented pattern of reacting recklessly, even going into combat mode with those weapons.
That's really unsettling combination, isn't it?
It really is. And it forces us, I think, to confront a bigger question that this whole tragedy raises, a question relevant far beyond this one case.
Which is?
What happens societally when you combine profound personal vulnerability, that deep anxiety, that fight mentality Dr. Vorster described, with immediate, easy access to extreme lethal force?
Pistorius becomes this stark example of that dangerous intersection.
Precisely. Regardless of what his exact intention was in that split second on Valentine's Day morning, the outcome was devastating. So the final thought, maybe for you, the listener, is to consider, what do these combined findings, the anxiety disorder, the physical impairment limiting flight, and the demonstrated enthusiasm for having lethal weapons close at hand, Tell us about the risks inherent in that mix.
The danger when intense personal fear meets readily available firepower.
Yeah. What are the societal implications when vulnerability and lethal capability collide so easily? It's a question that goes to the heart of debates about gun access, mental health, and personal responsibility, far beyond the specifics of this one tragic case.
A sobering thought indeed. The devastating cost when fear, maybe negligence, and the immediate power to kill violently converge.
Couldn't put it better.
Well, that brings us to the end of this deep dive. Thank you for joining us.